At her lavish engagement dinner, my daughter looked right through me as I sat, the only guest without a plate. When I gently asked the waiter if there had been a mistake, Isabelle interrupted, loud enough for the table to hear, "You'll be fine for one night, Mom. This isn't about you." Laughter erupted. Not mine. I smiled, swallowed my pride, and the hunger. What she didn't know was that the entire catering bill had been charged to my card. And I had just made the final payment. If she wouldn't feed her own mother, I'd feed strangers in her name. I wasn't always the woman who sat silent at her daughter's celebration, treated like an uninvited guest at her own investment. Once, upon a time, I was everything to Isabelle. My name is Margaret Ellison, retired schoolteacher, widow, mother, believer in hard work and homemade meals. For most of my life, I lived by simple rules: speak kindly, live modestly, give generously, and raise your children with both hands, one to support them, the other to let them go. Isabelle was my only child, a miracle born late in life after 2 miscarriages and more prayers than I can count. Her father, Daniel, passed away when she was just 11, leaving behind a small pension, a box of letters, and a child whose world had tilted too soon. From that moment on, I made it my purpose to soften the edges of her grief. We were a team, she and I. I packed her lunch every morning with little notes inside. I sat front row at every school play, every science fair, every awkward talent show. When she made it into culinary school, I cried into the crook of her neck like it was her wedding day. She was so determined, so talented, so certain of herself. I sold my grandmother's ring to help with her first semester fees. She promised she'd pay me back when she opened her own place. I told her to pay it forward instead. But somewhere, between college and career, between new cities and newer boyfriends, my daughter began changing shape. The sweet girl who used to hum while washing dishes, who begged to lick the cake batter spoon, became sharper, quieter, less available. She texted more than she called. Eventually, she stopped saying, "I love you," at the end of our conversations. Not out of malice, but because she assumed I already knew. And I did. For a while. But lately, Isabelle's affection had begun to feel selective, transactional, even. She reached out when she needed something, a loan, a connection, help with a vendor or a recipe. But she never asked how I was. She didn't know I had arthritis in my fingers now. She didn't notice I had let the garden go. She forgot my last birthday until I reminded her. Still, I made excuses for her. She's just busy. She's under pressure. She doesn't mean to be unkind, because that's what we do as mothers. We keep finding reasons to stay soft, even when the world, even when our children, start treating us like background noise. When Isabelle got engaged, I was hopeful again. Maybe this was a fresh start. She called me one night and said, "Mom, I need your help. I want to throw the engagement party of the year. Think modern elegance meets Michelin star." She sounded excited, giddy like the girl she used to be. "Of course," I said, "whatever you need." And she took me at my word. It started with little things. Could I co-sign the rental hall? Front the deposit for the tasting? She promised to reimburse me once the fiancé's family chipped in. I said yes each time, even when it meant dipping into the savings I'd been guarding for repairs to the house. After all, what was money, if not a means to celebrate your child's happiness? But as the planning escalated, custom linens, live, jazz trio, imported desserts, I began to realize I was not just a helper. I was the primary funder. And when I asked Isabelle about it, she smiled like it was obvious. "Mom, this party isn't just for me, it's for our families. People will remember this. It reflects us. You want people to see that, right?" I said yes, but inside, something flickered. I was starting to feel more like a patron than a parent, like I was being curated out of the very life I'd helped build. Still, I held on. Maybe, I thought, maybe at the party she'll stand up and say something kind. Maybe she'll Toast to me. Maybe she'll remember. But when she stood under the fairy lights at her engagement dinner, radiant in her white jumpsuit, holding her fiancé's hand, she introduced me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And that's my mom, Margaret. She raised me, kept me fed, I guess you could say. Laughter. Applause. I laughed too, but it tasted like rust. The engagement dinner wasn't the first sign. It was just the loudest one. Before that night, the red flags had been quieter, softer, dressed in politeness and pretty words. It all started with the call about the event planner. "Mom, I found her. You're going to love this, Marcy Blanton. She plans weddings for TV anchors and Fortune 500 heirs." I didn't know who Marcy Blanton was, but I pretended to be impressed. "She's going to help us design the dinner," Isabelle said, emphasizing design, not plan. "It's not just a meal, it's a statement. First impressions matter." "How much is she?" I asked gently. There was a pause. $3,000 for the package I want, but you'd just cover the deposit. I'll handle the rest later. That later never came. Just like the "I'll pay you back for the calligraphy artist," the string quartet, the floral arch, the personalized wine labels. Each item came with an emotional hook. "It's just this one thing, Mom. It's what makes the event feel magical." And every time I caved because I wanted her to have magic. After Daniel died, there hadn't been much of it in her life. She carried the grief like a knapsack, compact but ever-present. I thought giving her this celebration would finally help her lay that weight down. Maybe she'd smile like she did when she was 8 and thought cake solved everything. So I handed over my credit card, again and again. What hurt most wasn't the money, it was how quickly I disappeared into the transaction. There were group chats with the planner, her fiancé's mother, the bridesmaids. I was in one of them, but they always started new ones. Without me. When I'd make suggestions, I'd get vague responses like, "Cute idea, but we're going in a more elevated direction." They never said it outright, but I knew what they meant. I was the flavor of a different time. Too old-fashioned, too ordinary to belong in their curated world of Instagram aesthetics and champagne towers. A week before the dinner, Isabelle visited me for coffee, her first time in my home in over 3 months. She didn't comment on the dust in the corners or the broken screen door. She didn't ask how I'd been. She sat on the edge of the couch, scrolling through photos of rental chairs on her phone. I'm thinking gold-rimmed chargers. "Silver. Feels too cold," she said. I smiled politely. "I just want you to be happy." That's when she paused and looked up. "Mom, can I ask something delicate?" "Of course." "At the dinner, could you maybe not wear your Sunday black dress?" I blinked. "It's what I usually wear to nice things." "Right, but this is a little more high profile. There'll be press from his father's side. Maybe something less, well, less frumpy?" Frumpy. That word landed like a slap. I felt my chest tighten, but I nodded. "I'll see what I can find." That night, I dug through my closet. Everything I owned was simple and sensible. Nothing glamorous. I hadn't needed glamorous in decades. I ended up borrowing a pastel suit from a neighbor. It didn't fit quite right, but it wasn't frumpy. On the day of the dinner, I arrived. Early, hoping to help. The ballroom smelled like roses and roasted garlic. I offered to fold napkins or place candles. Isabelle's assistant looked at me kindly but distractedly. "Oh, the vendor's handling all of that." So I just sat. I watched as servers brought in gleaming trays of amuse-bouche, tiny edible flowers perched on top like jewelry. I recognized the menu: crab croquettes, wild mushroom risotto, truffle oil foam, dishes Isabelle had cooked for me in our kitchen back when she was practicing for her final exam. Back when we laughed when she dropped a plate or burned a sauce. This dinner was built on memories I thought we'd shared, and yet somehow I had become the one person excluded from the table. When the first round of plates went out and mine didn't come, I thought it was a mistake. I waited. Finally asked the server. He checked the list and shrugged. Only 42 guests were listed. You're not on it. Not on the list. I stared across the room at my daughter, radiant in her sleek white jumpsuit, standing beside her, fiancé. She raised a glass and a toast, laughing at something he whispered. Her eyes never searched for me. I wanted to believe she'd simply forgotten. That it wasn't intentional, but deep down, I knew. And still, I didn't want to ruin her night. So I sat back down at my empty table, smiled whenever someone glanced my way, pretended I was full. The worst part? No one noticed, not one guest. Stopped to ask why I wasn't eating. Not one of Isabelle's friends or bridesmaids acknowledged me beyond a polite nod, and I kept thinking, I paid for this dinner. I paid for this food, this haul, that dress on her back. I gave her this night. And she gave me nothing. Later that evening, on my way out, I passed the event coordinator's table. The catering invoice was sitting there in a folder. My name, Margaret Ellison, was on the billing line. The total, $13,420. The final installment had been charged. That morning. And for some reason, I smiled. Because at that moment, something inside me woke up. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its slow, methodical whir like a ticking clock inside my head. The image of Isabelle's untouched dinner plates danced behind my eyes. Shrimp glazed in something citrusy, filet mignon so tender you could cut it with a butter knife, and that dessert she used to make for my birthdays, lavender panna cotta. She'd served it to her guests. She didn't serve it to me. By morning, something in me had hardened, not in anger, but in clarity. I got up, put on the kettle, and opened my laptop. My fingers were stiff from arthritis, but I pushed through. I pulled up the invoice from my email. $13,420, broken down in 3 payments. The first 2 had already gone through. The third, nearly $4,000, was scheduled to process on Monday. I stared at it. Then I called the caterer. A woman named Elise answered. Cheerful, professional. Margaret Ellison? Yes, of course. Everything went beautifully, didn't it? Depends. On where you were sitting, I said dryly. Listen, I need to cancel the final payment. A pause. Oh, was something wrong with the food or service? No, I said calmly. The problem was with the guest list. She asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I told her no. I wanted the payment redirected. I had an idea, I said, one that might be more meaningful than another brunch. For people too full of themselves to be hungry. Elise hesitated. Well, we already ordered the food for the rehearsal brunch. It's prepped and scheduled for delivery tomorrow morning. Then let's not waste it, I said. Do you ever donate food to local shelters? That was the first step. The second was calling the shelter down on Mason Street, St. Adelaide's. I'd volunteered there back when Isabelle was little. We used to serve chili and white bread rolls to people who walked in off the street with their entire lives in a backpack. I asked if they had room for a food delivery. The woman on the other end of the line gasped. Do we ever? That afternoon, I drove to the shelter and met the director, Carla. We walked through the humble kitchen, the scuffed floors, the pantry with more gaps than groceries. Isabelle always said she wanted to cook for a cause, I murmured aloud, unsure whether I meant it for Carla or myself. I just don't think she meant this one. The next morning, the delivery came. Herbed chicken, roasted root vegetables, saffron rice, lemon tarts with sugared mint. Carla and I unpacked tray after tray. A few of the volunteers teared up, and at noon, the doors opened. People trickled in. Some smelled of sweat and rain. Some said thank you like it hurt their throat to speak. One older man with shaking hands asked if he could take an extra plate to his wife, who was too sick to come inside. I served him myself. I gave him mine. No one cared what name was on the catering tag. No one asked if the chargers were gold-rimmed or if the rosemary had been hand-plucked. They just ate and smiled. Meanwhile, back at Isabelle's world, something else was simmering. Around 2 p.m., she texted, "Mom, what happened to the rehearsal brunch? Everything's been canceled?" I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another text. "Did you cancel the food? Are you serious? Do you know how embarrassing this is?" Still, I said nothing. That evening, my phone rang. It was her. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was frantic. "Mom, you're acting insane. We had 40 people expecting a catered brunch. This is a complete nightmare." No apology, no concern. Just fury over appearances. The next day, her fiancé's mother called me, polite but clipped. She asked if I had canceled the event intentionally. "I redirected it," I said plainly, "to people who needed it more." There was a long silence, then a tight, "Well, that certainly explains the headlines." "Headlines?" I asked. Apparently, a reporter from the local paper had been at St. Adelaide's doing a feature on food insecurity. They snapped a photo of me handing a meal to a young boy in a knit hat. The article's headline, "Retired Teacher Redirects Wedding Feast to Feed." The forgotten. The image had been shared on Facebook, then picked up by a few local blogs, then shared again. My face, holding a ladle, smiling down at a boy with wide, grateful eyes. The caption read, "Compassion never goes out of style." I hadn't planned for it to go public, but once it did, it couldn't be undone. Isabelle called again. This time, I answered. "You're trending," she snapped. "People think I'm a monster." "I never said you were," I replied evenly. "You didn't have to." There it was, the truth. What had humiliated me had now humiliated her. But the difference was, mine had been quiet and lonely. Hers was loud and exposed. That photo of me handing out food, it unlocked something far deeper than attention or headlines. It took me back. Not to the pain of the dinner, but to the warmth of a time before all this distance grew between Isabelle and me. A time when she still curled into me after nightmares, when she clutched my apron strings in the grocery store, when she'd call out, "Mama, taste this," and beam as I faked shock at her first scrambled eggs, watery and scorched. But mine. All the same. There was one afternoon, years ago, I'll never forget. She was maybe 12, home early from school because she had a stomach bug. I brought her toast on a tray and sat beside her on the couch as she leaned into me, sweaty and pale, murmuring, "Don't ever leave me, okay?" I promised I wouldn't. I kept that promise. Through scraped knees and scraped hearts. Through every sleepless night before exams, every heartbreak, every birthday cake made from scratch, even when my back ached and my fingers wouldn't grip the mixer, even through the years where she grew quieter, colder, louder on social media than she ever was on the phone with me. I didn't realize until this week that I had been holding on to a version of my daughter that didn't exist anymore. Not. Really, I had been mothering a memory. Still, I blamed myself. Had I coddled her too much, given too freely, forgot to teach her how to give back, how to be grateful, how to see people? Or had she simply become someone I wouldn't have recognized, even if I'd passed her on the street? That thought haunted me. I sat on my porch the evening after the photo went viral, watching the sun dip behind the neighbor's sycamores. In my lap was a small photo album, one Isabelle made for me in middle school. On the inside cover, she had written in purple ink, "To the best cook, best nurse, best heart. I hope I grow up to be just like you." I traced those words with my fingertip. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped wanting to be like me. Maybe she saw how simple my life was, how small, and she mistook quiet for failure. A gust of wind rustled the trees. I could almost hear Daniel's voice. He'd always been the buffer, the calm in Isabelle's stormier moments. I missed him more in those days than I had in years. He would have known what to say, or at least how to hold me when I didn't. Instead, I was holding my own grief, layered and quiet. The kind you carry even when you're smiling in pictures. The following Sunday, I returned to the shelter, unsure if I'd be welcomed again. But when I arrived, Carla greeted me with open arms. "We had a line before we even opened," she said. "They were hoping you were coming back." That stopped me. Me? I hadn't mattered to anyone in so long, not in that way. Not in the way where my presence was anticipated, wanted. So I tied on the apron again. Served roast potatoes and meatloaf this time. A teenage girl with pink hair hugged me when I handed her a plate. "Thank you, Miss Lady," she said. "You got that real grandma energy. I missed that." I laughed. It felt good to laugh without bitterness. Midway through the day, I stepped out back to take a break. That's where I met Harold. He was one of the volunteers, a retired postal worker who brought in donated bread every week. We chatted about nothing for a while. Then he asked how I'd gotten involved. I told him. "Your own daughter left you hungry?" he said, frowning. "That's cold." "It was," I admitted. "But maybe she needed to forget where she came from to figure out where she's going." He nodded slowly. "You're kind. Kinder than I would have been." I smiled. I wasn't always, but something broke open. In me. Something that needed to break. That night, I cried. Not the kind of tears you wipe quickly and move on from. The deep kind. The kind that rise from the bones. The kind you cry when you finally admit what's been hurting you all along. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about being forgotten. Overlooked. Made small. And somehow, it took feeding people who had nothing for me to realize that I was not small. I was someone's mother. I was someone's memory of warmth. I was someone's reason to smile that day. And maybe, just maybe, I was still someone worth coming home to. Have you ever helped someone who forgot how to be grateful? Tell me your story below. I'm reading everyone. For the first time in years, I started waking up with purpose. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. Watering plants out of habit, microwaving dinner for one, filling quiet with television just to pretend I wasn't lonely. Now, I was packing lunch bags for the shelter, baking cornbread at dawn, calling Carla to ask if we needed more tea bags or if the new volunteers had shown up. It felt like spring inside my chest. Not because Isabelle had changed. She hadn't. Not yet. But because I had. The woman who used to exist only to support someone else's dreams had finally found her own rhythm again. And then came the article. A full spread in the Sunday Chronicle. Titled, "Mother Redirects Wedding Feast to Shelter, A Table Turned with Grace." The reporter had followed up with me after the viral post. I'd nearly said no. Fame wasn't something I wanted, but Carla convinced me. "People need to see what dignity looks like," she said, "especially when it shows up in an apron and orthopedic shoes." The article included quotes from the shelter guests and even Harold, who described me as gentle but fierce. Isabelle saw it, of course. She texted me that morning. "You really did this without telling me? You knew it would make me look bad." I typed out a dozen replies and deleted everyone. Then finally, "It wasn't about you, Isabelle. It never was." That was the last I heard from her for several days. And then, on a Wednesday morning, while I was pouring soup into a row of biodegradable bowls, she showed up, hair swept back, face bare, wearing a sweatshirt I hadn't seen since college. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, from the weight of pretending. She stood in the doorway of the shelter kitchen, uncertain, out of place. Carla spotted her first and raised a brow. "Friend of yours?" "My daughter," I said quietly, setting down the ladle. Isabelle stepped inside. I met her in the hallway, still wearing my apron, hands smelling of carrots and thyme. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "Good," I replied. "I don't have energy for that." "I came to see it for myself. The shelter, the food, the people you've been feeding with my—" She stopped herself. "With the money." I crossed my arms. "It was my money, Isabelle. My card. My savings, she winced. Right, I know, I guess I just... She looked down at her shoes. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I felt humiliated, she said finally, like everyone thought I was heartless. I was humiliated first. I said not cruelly, just plainly, and no one even noticed. She looked up at me then, eyes glossy. Why didn't you say something? That night at the dinner? Because I knew you wouldn't hear it. That landed. She leaned against the wall, her shoulders dropping. I don't know when I stopped being grateful, she said. Neither do I whispered. But I missed the girl who used to share her sandwich with me when mine got smashed in my lunch bag. She laughed through her nose. I forgot about that. I didn't. There was a silence between us that didn't feel hostile anymore. Just heavy. Honest. She looked around the kitchen. Can I help? I blinked. Help? Yeah. I mean, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can stir something. Or wash dishes. I gave her an apron. Watched her tie it around her waist like she had something to prove. It hung loosely, but she wore it with quiet dignity. That afternoon, we served lunch side by side. She didn't say much, and neither did I, but we smiled. At each other. At the guests. At the little moments that floated by without needing to be named. One woman took her plate, then looked at Isabelle and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. This is the best thing I've eaten all week." Isabelle blinked back tears. After. The last tray was washed and the chairs were stacked. She asked me if I wanted to get coffee. We went to a small cafe down the block. It was nothing fancy, just drip coffee and plastic creamers, but it felt like the most luxurious thing in the world. She sat across from me and said, "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'd like to try." "You don't have to." "Fix everything," I said. "Just stop breaking what's still left." She reached for my hand, and this time, she didn't take anything, she just held it. The coffee shop conversation felt like a turning point, but I knew better than to mistake. A moment of softness for a full transformation. Change, real change, takes time and resistance. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw less of Isabelle again. Not out of malice, just avoidance, and I understood that avoidance all too well. It's what we do when guilt starts to settle into the walls of our pride. Still, the ripples from the shelter photo hadn't stopped. In fact, they'd grown louder. Apparently, someone on Isabelle's fiancé's side had found the article and started asking uncomfortable questions. About the brunch cancellation. About the event budget. About why the bride's mother had redirected funds to a homeless shelter without consulting her daughter. Isabelle called me in a panic. "They think I'm some spoiled, cold-hearted brat," she said. "They keep bringing up your article, like it's this moral indictment." I wanted to soothe her, to tell her the storm would pass, but I also couldn't lie. "You told people I was frugal," she added, voice trembling. "That I was always practical, but now they think I'm a fraud." "I didn't tell anyone anything," I said gently. "They saw your silence, that's all." That didn't sit well. That weekend, I received an email from the event planner, Marcy Blanton, the same woman Isabelle had once worshipped. She wasn't writing to reprimand me. In fact, she was praising me. She wanted to feature the shelter. Donation as part of a new initiative called Compassionate Events, a way to encourage clients to offset extravagant spending with charitable giving. She asked if I'd be willing to consult on future projects as a kind of honorary advocate. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When I forwarded the email to Isabelle with a polite note, "Thought you'd like to see this?" Full circle, I suppose. Her response came in 3 words. "Please don't do this." But I did, not out of spite, but because I had finally realized that shrinking myself for her comfort wasn't love. It was erasure. Meanwhile, Isabelle's veneer was beginning to crack. She posted a photo of herself volunteering at a soup kitchen, smiling stiffly, holding a ladle with manicured fingers. The caption read, Giving back, always grateful. Heart work. I recognized the backdrop. It wasn't the shelter we'd gone to together. It was a PR-friendly nonprofit with sleek walls and a media contact. Comments were mixed. Some praised her. Others weren't so kind. "Didn't you refuse to feed your own mom at your engagement dinner?" one user wrote. Another chimed in, "Funny how you suddenly care now that you're getting bad press." Isabelle tried to clean it up with more posts, quotes about gratitude, photos of her prepping meals, a video of her tearfully thanking her first kitchen teacher, my mom. But the damage had already been done, and for the first time, she wasn't just angry, she was unraveling. I knew the signs, the short texts, the missed calls, the long silences followed by manic energy. This wasn't about public opinion. This was about something deeper cracking in her. One night, she showed up at my door unannounced. She was in sweatpants again, no makeup, clutching a half-eaten bagel in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. "I lost a sponsor," she said, voice thin. "For the pop-up kitchen I was launching. They said they wanted to support genuine voices in the food world." I led her to the couch. She didn't cry. She just deflated. "I built everything to look perfect," she whispered. "I thought if I made it shine enough, no one would look close." "They always look close eventually," I said. She handed me the papers. A draft budget, menus, branding. For her pop-up venture, Isabelle & Co. Then, softly, "I thought maybe we could do it together, but I don't know how anymore." There it was, the smallest crack of vulnerability. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it breathe. Let her sit with the discomfort of needing help and asking for it the right way this time. After a while, I said, "You've got talent, but if you want to feed people from the heart, you have to remember what hunger feels like." She nodded, slowly, and for once, she didn't argue. In the days that followed, a quiet truce settled between Isabelle and me. She came by more often now, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to cook, sometimes to cry when she thought I wasn't looking. And while her apologies weren't always spoken aloud, they came through in other ways. Folding my laundry without asking, fixing the broken porch light, restocking the fridge with things I liked, things she used to mock for being too old school. One morning, I found a small note taped to my teacup. "I see you now." No signature, but I didn't need one. Still, the outside world wasn't as forgiving as I had been. Her wedding was just 2 months away, but the guest list was shrinking. Her fiancé's family had become distant, cordial, but cold. One sponsor had already pulled out from her business venture, and now 2 more were reassessing their brand alignment. Her name, once whispered among up-and-coming culinary circles, had begun to feel like a risk instead of an asset. "You don't have to defend me," she said one evening as we walked through the farmer's market. "I created this mess. I'm not here to defend you," I said. "I'm here to make sure you don't lose yourself inside it." That's when she told me the truth, the full truth. She'd gone into debt trying to compete with the life she saw online, the curated weddings, the multi-million-dollar pop-ups, the polished lifestyle influencers who made her feel like her real self wasn't enough. They all looked like they had it together, she said. And I thought, maybe if I borrowed enough of their shine, I'd finally feel worthy. I listened, not with judgment, but with the ears of a mother who once held her child through their first failure, their first heartbreak, their first, "I can't do this." And the worst part, she added, I kept thinking, if I just kept moving, maybe you wouldn't see how lost I was. I reached for her hand. I saw. I just didn't know how to reach you through the performance. That night, she stayed over. We watched old home videos on DVD, ones we hadn't dusted off in years. Isabelle at 5, covered in flour, proudly presenting me with a misshapen birthday cake. "I made it all by myself," she'd squealed. "Mom helped just a tiny bit." She laughed through tears. I forgot she existed. That girl, the one who made food because she loved it, not because she needed it to prove something. She's still in there, I said. She just got quiet. Then came the next turning point. The shelter called. They were planning a community fundraiser dinner and asked if I'd help organize it, maybe even cook something. I was flattered, but hesitant. My hands didn't work like they used to. My eyes tired quickly now. But before I could respond, Isabelle jumped in. "Let us cater it," she said, "not for publicity, not for a write-up, just because we want to." "We?" I asked. She nodded. "I want to build something real, Mom, and I want you in the kitchen with me." And just like that, it wasn't about headlines or redemption arcs. It was about roots, about grounding something in honesty and care. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We planned a menu together, simple but soulful. Braised chicken thighs in rosemary broth, roasted carrots with honey glaze, biscuits made from my grandmother's recipe, the one we used to call cloud bread because of how light it turned, out when you didn't overmix it. We cooked in my little kitchen, side by side, laughing, bickering, crying sometimes. There were moments I had to stop, rest my hands, let her take over, and she did, gratefully, gently, without ego. On the night of the dinner, over 100 people filled the shelter's multi-purpose room. Folding tables dressed with paper runners, vases of wildflowers, soft jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. When Isabelle stepped up to speak, her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "This dinner is special to me," she began, "because I lost sight of what food was supposed to be about. I used to think it was status, then success. But I've learned recently that food is love. It's dignity. It's a second chance on a plate." She looked at me. Right at me. And I have my mom to thank for reminding me of that. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was warm, full of meaning, just like the food. After the plates were cleared, a woman approached me and said, "You must be proud." I looked over at Isabelle, standing in the kitchen doorway, apron smeared, smiling at something Harold had said. "Yes," I said, "I am. But more than that, I'm hopeful. Because for the first time in a long, long while, I believed that what we were building wasn't just a meal or a moment. It was a beginning. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one. 3 weeks after the fundraiser dinner, Isabelle returned to my house with something unexpected. A check, handwritten, folded inside a blank card. The front had no flowers, no cursive quotes, just her name in simple black ink. "I know it won't fix everything," she said, "but it's a start." I opened the card. The check was made out for $4,000, the exact amount of the third catering installment I had redirected to the shelter. "I still have more to pay back," she added, "and not just money. I owe you respect, time, the space you never asked for, but always deserved." It wasn't the check that moved me. It was the honesty, the vulnerability, the way she didn't try to wrap it in guilt or excuses. That night, she stayed for dinner, not a fancy one. Just lentil soup and cornbread. We ate together in the kitchen, our elbows brushing, the radio playing softly in the background. No photographers, no filters, just the two of us and the quiet, ordinary miracle of healing. Halfway through the meal, she looked up from her bowl and said, "You know, I used to think you were small." I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Not in a cruel way," she continued, "just invisible. Like you lived in the margins of your own life. I thought I had to be big enough for both of us." I set my spoon down. "And now?" She looked me straight in the eyes. "Now I know I was the one living small. In fear. In performance. You lived fully, even when no one clapped. That's not small, Mom. That's so damn big." I couldn't speak for a moment. Just reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The next day, she returned again. this time with a box of fresh produce and a folder tucked under her arm. "New business proposal," she said, setting it in front of me. "But this time, it's not just mine. I want it to be ours." She called it Rooted Table, a pop-up concept where for every meal ticket sold, another plate would be served at a shelter or offered to someone in need, delivered with dignity, not pity. No canned vegetables, no half-hearted leftovers. Real food, real love. Just like we used to make in our kitchen. We cook, we serve. "We bring community back to the table," she said. "What do you think?" I stared at the proposal for a long moment, and then I reached for a pen. We launched our first Rooted Table dinner 6 weeks later. A rented church basement, string lights we strung ourselves, and 70 guests, half of them paying customers. Half invited from shelters and halfway homes, no labels to separate them, just shared tables, shared stories. Isabelle stood at the front and welcomed them all. She didn't mention the scandal, or the headlines, or the fact that she had once forgotten what a mother's hunger looked like. She just said, "Tonight we eat together." And we did. That night, as we washed dishes side by side, she turned to me with a look I hadn't seen since she was a little girl, hopeful, a little sheepish, hungry for approval. "Did I do okay?" she asked. I dried a plate and looked at her. "You fed every soul in this room," I said. "You did more than okay." A few weeks later, Thanksgiving rolled around. The shelter asked if we'd be willing to cater the holiday meal. Isabelle didn't hesitate. "We'd be honored," she said. "We spent the whole week preparing. I made pies the way my mother used, too, with buttery crusts that flaked at the edges. Isabelle brined the turkeys overnight in orange peels and rosemary. The air in my kitchen smelled like love and cinnamon and second chances. On Thanksgiving Day, we served almost 200 people. As the last plates were handed out, Isabelle stood beside me in a flower-streaked apron and whispered, "Thank you for feeding me, even when I didn't deserve it." I swallowed the lump in my throat and leaned into her. "You always deserved it," I said. "You just forgot how to be hungry for the right things." She nodded. "I remember now." Have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you deeply? What helped you take that step? I'd love to hear. Time has a funny way of softening the sharpest edges. A few months ago, I sat at an engagement dinner with an empty plate and a heart full of quiet ache. I felt invisible, forgotten, like the years I had poured into my daughter had evaporated into designer linens and hand-curated menus. But now, looking out across the community garden we built behind the shelter, where herbs sprout beside tomato, vines and laughter rings louder than judgment, I see something else entirely. I see growth, not just in Isabelle, not just in me, but in the tiny, invisible spaces between us, where old wounds once lived and now, gently, new roots have taken hold. Forgiveness didn't come like a lightning bolt. It arrived in the slow, stubborn moments, washing dishes side by side, peeling, sweet potatoes at sunrise, watching Isabelle wipe her hands on her apron before hugging a guest goodbye. It came in watching her show up, not for approval, but out of purpose. I've learned that healing doesn't demand grand apologies or perfect words. It just needs presence and choice. The choice to stay at the table, even when you've been hurt. The choice to speak when silence feels easier. The choice to look someone you love in the eye and say, "You broke me, but I still believe in your better self." I don't know what will happen in the next year. Life, I've found, doesn't care much for our plans. The wedding is postponed, not canceled, but Isabelle says she wants to walk down the aisle with less spectacle, more sincerity. She jokes now that her first wedding was to the image of a person she was never meant to be. And as strange as it sounds, I'm grateful for that night she left me unfed. Because in that hollow moment, I found the courage to fill others, to nourish not just bellies, but dignity, to feed the parts of myself I had starved while giving everything to everyone else. Isabelle and I aren't perfect. We still bicker over spice levels. I still remind her to slow down when she tries to do too much at once. She still rolls her eyes when I double layer foil on casseroles for no reason at all. But there's laughter now, there's warmth, and there's room. Room for both of us to be women with stories, not just a mother and a daughter caught in each other's shadows. People ask if I regret redirecting that brunch budget, if I regret going public. The truth? Not for a second, because the people we served that day didn't care about gossip or guest lists. They cared about being seen, about being reminded that they mattered, that someone had thought of them, not as an afterthought, but as a priority. And in doing that, I reminded myself of the same. We don't always get the love we give. Sometimes we're left standing at a dinner we paid for without a plate or a thank you. Sometimes we raise children who grow distant, who forget our birthdays, who forget us. But sometimes they find their way back. And when they do, it's not because we begged or scolded or guilted them. It's because we lived our truth so fully, so fiercely, that they recognized themselves in our reflection and finally chose to come home. If you're watching this, wondering if your quiet sacrifices ever mattered, let me say this. They did. They do. And one day, someone will finally look up from their plate, see all you've given, and say, "Thank you."